Welcome, everybody, to the BRICKYARD podcast, going over all things sports this past week. The ESPYs, Stephen A. Smith money, the USA men's basketball team. We're also here to review the John Wall 2010 draft, as well as going over Tyreke Hill's top 5 and the biggest bombs of 2023.
Yeah, and many more things that we'll cover throughout the show. But welcome to the last episode of the BRICKYARD podcast in this very studio right here. I won't say it's where it all started because we had a dream. We hung out in each other's houses, basically recording back and forth. Got an apartment, was able to move in here together and make the show happen, really make it come along, and it's come pretty far the past few years from adding video to just getting the overall flow of the podcast down. But we met kind of oddly. We kind of both joined a scam at the same time. Yeah. It's like one of those weird jobs, like if you're at home, do you know those people like at a either a BJ's or a Sam's Club that's trying to get you to buy a cell phone for a phone plan? They're trying to tell you you're going to save a bunch of money.
The phone assholes, the guys who ask you who your service plan is. We were that asshole for about 3 months. At the same time, the stars aligned. We were both there for, I think, exactly 2 months or 3 months.
Yeah.
We both left the same time, and we're like, you know what? Let's do this podcast. Let's make a football podcast because we're the best and brightest in the world.
Yeah, we're the best and brightest in the world because we repeatedly, not only do we just get things right, we predicted pretty much the entire first round wrong. We've been able to kind of escape and call which teams are going to be good, which teams are going to be frauds, and we pretty much gotten all of those right with some hiccups along the way. But when we met at that job, it was kind of like immediately like, this feels like a scam my first day of work. And it was not advertised as a job where you're just standing in a store. They're like, yeah, it's a marketing gig. Are you fine like doing this? And like, okay, it was kind of vague. Like, I'll play ball. It was some pretty good money, and you did make some decent money there. But the way you would move people up is basically be like, oh, you had a certain amount of sales 2 weeks in a row. You're a leader now, and you have to call people every night. And that's kind of how we ended up hitting it off, is because you'd have to call me every night. Then we'd start talking about sports.
Yeah. No, I had to call you and a few other people every night, and I'd get the other calls done first. And then we would just talk about the NBA. I'd be like, oh, yeah, I have to ask these questions. Okay, cool. Anyways, what's going on in the NFL, NBA, everything else, and soon blossomed something better.
Yeah, blossomed something better for sure. But I felt like the one we work for was AT&T, and it seems like they just have these small third-party companies that they fund. You get people into a contract, and then that liquidates it. AT&T can't do anything because they're technically not the company that did it for you, and it's a good way to pick up a bunch of new customers, and yeah, kind of a scam.
Oh, it's completely a scam. If you ever see any of those phone operators, you're not going to get the credits that they say you're going to get. So run far, far away from those.
Yeah, but thankfully we learned from our mistakes and definitely left both those jobs very quickly. But speaking of the ESPYs, a scam, we had the ESPYs the other day.
Yes, we did. So basically the Grammys of sports, the Oscars of sports. Nobody really cares about the ESPY awards, but thought it'd be fun to go over these different awards and if they're valid or not.
Yeah. So at number 1, we start with baseball, and we have Shohei Ohtani as the best MLB player. Stephen A. famously said he could not be the face of baseball because he doesn't speak English. Well, looks like that's not the case because he is ESPN's best MLB player. Do you think he deserves it?
Well, he can pitch like an ace, and he can hit like the cleanup man in the lineup. He's one of the best at both of those things. Won MVPs, went to the Dodgers, and then this past season was insane. I think he won the MVP, if I'm not mistaken. So best MLB player, absolutely. There's a couple other players to shout out, but they can't do what Shohei Ohtani does.
Yeah, and you follow baseball more than me. I know I follow UFC a little bit more than you, so I'll agree with your expertise. And then after that, what we care about, best NFL player, Patrick Mahomes. And with this one, people are like, well, technically pound for pound, he's not the best player because if you look at like what Tyreke Hill or CMC does, but it's always been the best quarterback is the best player. and that's just always the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
It's always the way it has been, and I don't see it ever changing because they have the most impact on the game, even though he may not technically be the best player at football.
I think he's the face of the league, though. I mean,
Yeah.
he's been in pretty much every Super Bowl since he started with the Chiefs, if not in the AFC title game. And he's the only player left in the league who's won 3 Super Bowls. And he's going to keep winning more. So I think he's the face of the league. He's the best NFL player.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with it. And then after that, we had the best driver as Max Verstappen. And I don't care about golf, so
Nobody cares.
nobody cares. And then the best NBA player, to the shock of most people, I feel like this is the second most controversial award, was Luka Doncic from the Dallas Mavericks.
Interesting. I understand the pick. I understand Luka Doncic, fan favorite and especially ESPN, big fan of them. I'm surprised we didn't see. I was surprised you didn't see like a LeBron there or like Jokic or Giannis. But Luka, I mean, sure. And for an ESPY award, I don't care.
Yeah, for an ESPY award, I feel like he was the best player last season. However, I feel like Jokic is still the best player in the league, and until you win a title, you really can't take that mantle away from him. When players like Giannis have won a title, players like Jokic have won a title before, and then also Luka only plays half of the game.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't play defense.
Yeah. I don't think he's the best NBA player. Top 5, sure, but I think you could have given it to Tatum. You could have given it to Giannis. You could have given it to Joker. And if they really wanted to make you cry, they could have put Joel Embiid there.
Yeah, if they put Joel Embiid there, Mr. I haven't got out of the second round. Like, at least Luka made it to the finals. He went from, I have the best backcourt in the league to I have no help very fast. Like, as soon as like everything's going well, it's like, oh, your teammates are really good. And it's like the LeBron complex where it's like, it's really not Luka's fault. It's that he doesn't have any help when we talked about how much help he had the past 3 playoff rounds nonstop.
Yeah. And it also helps when you have one of the best point guards of the last 15 years on your team.
Yeah.
Who has won a championship and has one of the biggest shots in NBA history to his name.
Yeah.
But no, he doesn't have any help.
No, he doesn't have any help. So Luka kind of mixed on that one. I think you should actually have to win a title to be able to be the best player in the league. And as of right now, I just think with how limited he is on defense, where he's literally breaking records for the most blow-bys in NBA history in a playoff run, like, that's some pretty substantial stuff when you're breaking records for being awful on one end of the floor, but you're the best all-around player.
Yeah.
But after that, we had the Shane Gillis Award, the best athlete with a disability.
That's awesome.
And
well, actually, Eminem says we can say it. So
Eminem
says we can say it, so we can say it because we don't care if we get canceled, just like Eminem.
Just like Eminem, yeah.
The Retard Award.
The retard. I mean, you could just be disabled, but yeah, Eminem says that's what this award is, so we have to go by his words. And
Slim Shady made it.
It was Brenna Huckabee for snowboarding. So
nice.
Congrats. Great at snowboarding. Yeah. And then after that, we had the best college athletes women's women's sports, which was Caitlin Clark.
Yeah, deserved. It's kind of changed the way we looked at women's basketball. Her and a few other players, but yeah, she is the best women's basketball player, so she deserves it. Yeah,
she set records there. And then after that, we had the best WNBA player, Jaya Wilson. Congrats to you. I am counting on the media to really dictate who the best player is because I just don't watch enough WNBA to know. So let me know if that's correct.
Next year, it'll probably be Caitlin Clark, I assume.
And then best breakthrough athletes, we had Juju Watkins, USC basketball. Congrats to Juju.
Yes.
Best championship performance, Jaylen Brown for the Boston Celtics. And he was the finals MVP. And I feel like if you're the finals MVP, generally you probably had the best championship performance.
Yes, more often than not. I mean, Super Bowl, maybe you get a nomination there. Big World Series run, maybe. But ultimately, Jaylen Brown, with pretty much the entire Celtics run, I think he deserves the nom there.
Yeah, and then the last one here, like, worth talking about, because it's a very weird one, was Prince Harry winning for the Pat Tillman Award for Service. And it's an award that's supposed to be for someone connected to sports, yes?
Yes.
And he like kind of started his own league, and it was more of a charity thing so he could get a tax break, and he just put his name on it and the checkbook. However, it should go to an athlete or a head coach who has actually made a huge impact in their community, like what Jaylen Brown is trying to do in Boston right now, where he said he wants to bring Black Wall Street back to Boston, and he's making a lot of changes, at least socially and in his own community. And I feel like it should be someone who has set an example on just the massive impact you can make. Even LeBron James, with what he's done for Cleveland, everything he's given back there. But like for Prince Harry, who's not even an athlete, like the ESPYs should be recognizing people heavily involved in sports, in mainstream sports like the NFL, the NBA, MLB, golf, hell, even hockey, UFC, like any of the major sports. Not you started a nice charity league.
Yeah, no. And if you remember, like, for those who don't know, last year it went to the Buffalo Bills training staff with what happened with DeMar Hamlin.
Yeah.
I'd seen that obviously, like, they deserved that award. But for this, it's like Prince Harry made a charity write-off, and he's in the royal family, and I guess that makes him eligible for it. But nobody even knew that he was creating this league. And then also, like, nobody knows any affiliation that he has to sports. So very questionable award choice.
Yeah, and England hasn't even won a Super Bowl before. England hasn't won an NBA title before.
World Series.
Yeah.
Stanley Cup.
Yeah, Stanley Cup. The only relevant person in England right now is Tyson Fury, and then Leon Edwards is a UFC champion. But other than that, like, England really doesn't have any ties to sports unless we're going down the realm of soccer or, European football.
Yeah. And as Rick Pitino once said, the Beatles aren't walking through that door.
No.
So who the hell cares
No,
about Prince Harry?
Yeah, and I feel like Prince Harry's just someone like, there are way better players that you could talk about in the NFL or the NBA that have actually put in the time, put their own dollars on the line when they're not just doing it for a write-off. They're doing it to actually make a difference in their community.
Yeah, I agree.
So, yeah, Prince Harry is a little bit confusing. The ESPYs, they happened this year. We talked about some winners there. Let us know what your favorite winner was. Which winner do you think you had the biggest problem with? Was it Prince Harry? Was it Luka? Maybe some of you are out here saying that Caitlin Clark shouldn't have been the best college athlete. Maybe it should have been Angel Reese, but the ESPYs went by, and then a lot of people at ESPN were talking about Stephen A. Smith's contract, where we had the drama with them giving Pat McAfee all of this money. He had some drama with them last year, and some people were watching Stephen A's pockets, basically saying this guy should not have been pushing for the amount of money that he was, or he's not worth it.
Which is wild to me. Have you turned on ESPN the last decade? Have you watched First Take, Stephen A's World, all of the different events that they host? Who's on there every single time? It's Stephen A. Smith. And he's asking for $25 million annually, which I think for Stephen A. Smith is pretty fair, considering a lot of these other major sportscasters are getting 15 to 20 million as well. With the amount of work that he does, with how entertaining he is, with how transcendent he is to the ESPN brand, I think he deserves 25 million in a heartbeat.
Yeah. And with Stephen A., I know a lot of people don't like him. They just say he's loud, he's obnoxious. He actually doesn't know what he's talking about. He only got famous because he was friends with Allen Iverson. Then you have the Jason Whitlocks of the world. However, first of all, you are worth what you command in the market. And if you command $25 million and ESPN gives you that money, guess what you're worth? $25 million. And the thing with Stephen A. Smith is he may not be the most knowledgeable about basketball or football. However, what he does do is he listens to his fans, and he's able to talk about something for 7 days a week, keep the energy levels high when you see him on the NBA broadcast, where he's basically up at First Take at 10 in the morning, and then he's doing NBA Countdown, and he's doing the halftime show, getting amped up at 11 o'clock at night for a Western Conference game taking place at 10:30, and he's there putting in the hours, getting up, and then also it's really hard to be enthusiastic about something and articulate a phrase about something you don't care about, yet he has a lot of sports that he doesn't really care about that he has to talk about. And then also on his podcast, he takes these fan questions, whether it's like, where would you want to land in Fortnite? Um, would you rather have Pickle Rick or Larry the Cucumber? And he gets all of these bizarre anime questions. However, he's really good at sounding passionate and sounding like he knows what he's talking about. And most of all, he's there just to be entertaining. He's the loud, funny guy on your TV. And it's definitely a tough skill. And not a lot of people can do what he does, because if you take him off First Take, it becomes unwatchable.
Yeah, and it's been unwatchable without him on the days that he takes his hiatus. Also, you think about how valuable he is to the ESPN brand, a company that Disney is actively trying to sell. If you're going to pay Stephen A. Smith, you've seen them, how they've recruited Pat McAfee, and for a while they had JJ Redick, but those guys are not strung to ESPN. They don't need them. Stephen A. Smith, he's at a point now where he doesn't necessarily need ESPN either. He could dictate a lot of money. He could go to Fox Sports. He could go to one of their big competitors. So he can say to them, you're going to give me max amount of money or else I'm going to leave. And it's going to hurt ESPN a hell of a lot more than Stephen A. Smith if they were to break up. So ultimately for him, with how much he contributes content-wise, with how valuable he is to ESPN specifically, give him all the money he deserves, all the money he needs.
Yeah, and it's like the amount of money you deserve is the amount of money that you get on the dotted line when you sign it. And some people may say, oh, this person deserves more money, this person deserves less money. But the fact of the matter is, if there's a company that's going to pay you a certain amount of money, whether you think they're overpaid or underpaid, that's what that person's value is at that given time in the market. And you shouldn't be like upset that someone got paid either. Like, the weirdest part is when people pocket watch and they're upset that someone gets a bunch of money. Like, oh, he just does it to talk about sports. Like, okay, do that 7 days a week. Talk about the NFL, the NBA, and talk about repetitive topics. I mean, when you're talking about kind of the same things over and over again, you have to come up with these weird, hypothetical, bizarre NBA and NFL questions in July and early August, where we're kind of in sports purgatory right now, and baseball's not really that mainstream where people are going to tune in and be like, yes, I really want to see that guy scream about baseball, when we're a sport that cries when someone looks at their own home run.
Yeah, no, we're in the dark times of sports right now, and Stephen A. Smith, whatever he deserves to get, he's going to get. I think about it this way, right? For ESPN, this is a franchise that is desperately trying to maintain the talent it has and not have more people go to Fox, like pretty much what happened 10 years ago. Think about it as if you're like the Carolina Panthers or the Patriots or a team that sucks in the NFL.
Yeah.
And they want to keep their star. If Matt Judon was going to leave the Patriots, or if the Panthers had a good player and he wanted to leave, Brian Burns.
Yeah.
And you want to maintain him, you're going to have to give them a bag, just like they gave a bag to Deontay Johnson, just like the Jags had to overpay for Calvin Ridley, or I should say the Titans in this case, because they did that last year. If you're a bad team and you're a bad brand like ESPN is, you overpay to get the talent that you need.
Yeah, it's like, that's a great comparison. The first team that comes to mind is what happens when Tom Brady leaves the New England Patriots, when you have subpar talent at wide receiver, your offensive line is falling apart, and you have some good running backs, but you don't really have too much talent on offense. And then if you take Stephen A. out, the reason why he has to be on every single show is because every single show has a glaring hole. Just think about how boring First Take would be without him. Shannon Sharp, I liked him better on that like back and forth with Skip Bayless. Like on ESPN, he comes off more as like an energetic CNN analyst, to be honest. And it's like not the same vibe from Shannon Sharp on ESPN, and I liked him better on Undisputed. And I don't really think he could carry First Take the same way Stephen A. can, even though his podcast is massive. I feel like he's better on his podcast as a one-on-one interviewer, similar to being one-on-one with Skip, than kind of a commercialized TV role, because I feel like Undisputed was more of a laid-back vibe, where ESPN is kind of like the Avengers, where now we need to have 5 people on every single panel. There's no more one-on-one debates, and maybe for this segment we'll have Chris Broussard on, or this segment we'll have a Rob Parker on. Now it's like, let's have loud idiot on, let's have loud idiot number 2 on, let's have loud idiot number 3 on, Stephen A and Shannon Sharp,
Yeah.
and then Molly will interrupt people.
Yeah, and that's what ESPN's become. And without Stephen A. Smith, I think they lose about half of their audience, if not more. So really, you would see the end of ESPN, similar to your Tom Brady comparison with the Patriots.
Yeah.
Without Stephen A. Smith, ESPN is the Carolina Panthers. They're the New England Patriots. They're the shell of their former selves more than they already are.
Yeah.
So pay him whatever he wants and make him happy, or else he's going to go somewhere else and be just as famous.
Yeah, he can go somewhere else and be just as famous. And then he can also just lean into his podcast brand and then work with someone to create his own media company, because I feel like he's someone who could create something like a Outkick, like Clay Travis did, like a Valuetainment, like a Volume Sports, like Colin Cowherd did, like a Barstool. He could definitely create something like that. And then if he's not on ESPN, he doesn't have to kind of tiptoe the line that he kind of does right now when he talks about other issues besides sports.
Yeah, and hell, whether it be the Volume or the Ringer, or hell, even a Dawn to Sports, like our colleague
launched all of the
Jaylen Brown, Dawn to Sports alumni USA team. A lot of controversy around Jaylen Brown not joining the basketball roster. They added Derek White after Kawhi Leonard, we predicted, by the way, steps out of the Olympian roster.
Yeah, we predicted Kawhi would leave, because I was like, why would Kawhi want to play in the not want to play in the regular season, get injured in the playoffs, and then play for Team USA? Like, it doesn't really make any sense. Okay, maybe you have 2 NBA championships and you want a gold medal. You really want that pride and valor for your country. But then the Clippers and Team USA together, they decided, because he needed 2 of them, to tell him, hey, maybe it'd be better if you just actually focused on being able to play long-term for the Clippers. And it honestly just seemed like he went there for the photo shoot. Like, he got there, got his photo shoots with Team USA. You're like, look, Kawhi, AD, LeBron, Kevin Durant, Steph, Jason Tatum, Anthony Edwards, Halliburton. How cool is this outside of Joel Embiid being on the team? And then Kawhi was like, all right, guys, I know I'm the fun guy. I know I'm the funny guy on the team. I can't play anymore. And then we're like, oh, a small forward who is known as a two-way player is leaving Team USA, who is a forward, a two-way forward. And then we're like, okay, perfect replacement would be Jaylen Brown, the finals MVP, someone who was left off of all the all-NBA teams, someone who was the highest paid player in all of the NBA until Jaylen Brown got paid, and has showed up in the playoffs, deserved to be on this team, wants to be on this team. But we're going to go with a guard when we just lost a forward in Derek White, who's also a two-way player, also a very good player. But what does Derek White do better than Jaylen Brown?
Be bald.
Be bald. Yeah, he's better at being bald.
He's better at being bald.
I feel like Jaylen Brown would be even better at being bald than Derek White. But then it's like, okay, why is Jaylen Brown not on Team USA if he wants to be on the team? And that kind of just fuels the whole theory where he's like, everyone's against me. They don't want me on the team. And then he kind of insinuated, some people jumped to the theory that Nike is the one currently keeping him off the team right now.
Well, I mean, it makes sense because we joked about the Donda Sports thing, but he's one of the only players who ended up signing with Donda Sports, him and Antonio Brown. He's been outspoken about different political opinions like the Black Wall Street and a number of other things. So you think about how he was left off of an all-NBA team, even though he went all the way through the finals and he was the best player on the Celtics throughout the finals, best performance. You look at the numbers there. Won finals MVP. ESPY's recognized him here. Now at this point, it is questionable because there are plenty of players on the basketball roster where you're like, are they better than Jaylen Brown? You go down that roster, right? Obviously, you're going to see the Embiids and the Tatums and the other players of this world. But Derek White, we love Derek White, and he's great, and he's obviously, I think he's fitting on the U.S. Olympic roster. But Jaylen Brown should be on that roster too. And
Yeah.
it's absolutely absurd that he's not.
And it's also like, why would you? My problem with it was like, even if you thought Derek White was a better player than Jaylen Brown, why wouldn't you want to replace Kawhi Leonard, who is a lengthy two-way 3-and-D wing, with another lengthy 3-and-D wing like Jaylen Brown? Like,
Yeah.
it didn't make sense, like, in general, off of just the position, and you have 3 players on the Celtics on Team USA when people are having the conversation, is Jaylen Brown better than Jason Tatum? Like, that's a real conversation in sports. It's a dialogue. Probably, I don't know how much it's split common if your team Jaylen or Jason. It's probably about 60-40 Tatum versus Brown right now. Personally, I believe Tatum's a better all-around player, but some people think Jaylen Brown is better. But the point is, it's a real discussion which player is better. So why wouldn't you replace Kawhi with the same person who plays his position, then you replace him with a guard? That's when I raise my eyebrow, like, okay, what's going on here? Because there's no reason for him not to be on the team. I get you're sponsored by Nike. I get Jaylen Brown was endorsing Enes Kanter and what Enes Kanter was saying at the time about how Nike makes their products in a country, and now he renamed his name to Enes Freedom. And then Jaylen Brown also supported that, and then basically saying, okay, is that why I'm being left on Team USA? Because I won't wear Nike? Because Jaylen Brown isn't someone who wants to be associated with that company. And they're like, okay, well, if we have to do a photo shoot, what are you going to be wearing if it's not Nike? And then we're paying for the sponsorship, and then we basically won't be able to show you wearing the sponsorship, or we'll have to like pan out so you can't see the shoes, and it kind of messes up the whole thing. But it shouldn't matter because it's Team USA basketball and it's the Olympics, and having the best players possible to give us the best chance to win is what matters most. And having Jaylen Brown on the team instead of Derek White or Drew Holiday would give us the best chance to win.
Yeah, I agree. If you want to make the best roster who's going to win the gold, Jaylen Brown's one of the top 15 players in the league right now for Team USA, and it's ridiculous that he's not on the roster.
Yeah, and then we just played Australia, and we only beat them by 6 points.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And who's on that team?
I don't know. Probably Andrew Bogut still. Is Andrew Bogut still playing?
Somewhere.
Australia, probably. And then we beat Canada. Dylan Brooks went home. So Dylan Brooks, all of that talk from Dylan Brooks is finally settled down, whereas like Team USA also has to score on me when they're like, yeah, we have no problem doing that, and we never actually ever have had a problem scoring on you, and you're not even an all defensive player anymore.
Is Dylan Brooks like the new Patrick Beverley, where he's the biggest talker but not a very good player in general?
He's kind of like a Patrick Beverley. Like, I feel like Pat Bev went through an era was he was able to play, but yeah, I would say he's definitely a worse version of Patrick Beverley, because Patrick Beverley can at least be a guard sometimes, score a little bit better than Dylan Brooks, but definitely in the same realm, where Russell Westbrook came out and said Patrick Beverley doesn't actually play defense. He just runs around waving his arms, making it look like he's doing something where he's really not, and he's pretty easy to get by.
Yeah. And Dylan Brooks is kind of a similar figure. Maybe a better defensive player, but not as good as his shit talk.
No, and he's not good enough to back up his shit talk. All he's doing is making it inconvenient for his teammates, where if you're someone who's on the Grizzlies and John Morant gets hurt and you're still giving LeBron reasons, like at this point with players, like you'd want to be looking for reasons to not give them motivation. You're not going to get in 40-year-old LeBron's head anymore. You're not going to get in AD's head anymore. You're not going to get in Jokic's head. So why are you giving them a reason to show up? Like, honestly, basketball right now, if you're friends with them, kind of neutral, then you're giving them less of a reason to show up. With Dylan Brooks, he's like, yeah, best player in the world. You need extra motivation, Steph Curry, to drop 60 points when you're going to drop 30 before.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And then, yeah, going after LeBron, going after all these other players, like, he ended up hurting him in the long run. And that's why his career is basically over.
Yeah, he's hanging out in Houston, so doing Houston things with Ime Udoka. So we'll see where Dylan Brooks goes from there. But Jaylen Brown left off of Team USA. I definitely think he should have been on the team.
I agree.
Because he's better than Derek White, and he's kind of the same type of player as Kawhi Leonard. A little bit smaller, but we
We're-
also have some other kind of average players in the 2016 draft.
Yeah, so continuing our series here, if you've watched our last few episodes, we've been reviewing old drafts, starting with whether it be the NFL. We did the 2020 NFL draft. We've gone through the NBA drafts. We did the 2009 draft, 2013. Well, now today, I was at the gym a couple days ago, and I'm like, what the hell is the John Wall draft? Because it's a weird draft in the event that we had like John Wall and these other players that we're going to go over with weird legacies, like legacies that we can't really comprehend. So we're going to go through the draft and talk about some of these players and where their legacy really is with NBA history, whether it be for the 2010s or even bigger, just NBA history at large. Because this draft, you'll see there's a lot of players who are really solid players, but not a lot of like all-time greats. Like 2009, we have Steph, and we have like the Blake Griffins of the world, James Harden. This draft, we don't know.
In this draft, we don't know, because usually in like even 2011, the year after this draft, we have Klay Thompson, who I would take over anyone in this draft. And yes, that means Paul George, who's also in this draft, who we'll get to later. We have Jimmy Butler in this draft, who I take over anyone in this draft. And yes, that includes Paul George, who was also taken in this draft. And then we also had Kyrie Irving, who I would take over Paul George. Who's
Was he in this draft?
Kyrie?
No, Paul George.
Paul George, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was in this draft.
Okay.
And there's probably 4 players in 2011 who I would take over Paul George.
Was in the draft here.
In the draft, yeah.
This draft here that we're going to go over.
This draft here.
Yeah, I agree. So we're going to go over this draft, the Paul George draft. Who's in the 2010 draft?
No, it's the John Wall draft.
Yeah. So the number 1 overall pick is John Wall, who, interestingly, if you're looking at like NBA history, he's somebody who is more of a legend than he is like a Hall of Famer. Like players are going to look at him like they looked at, and I think it's to a lesser extent like a Derrick Rose, where was a really fun player to watch, but injuries caught up to him, and he was not a very efficient player, but he was fun to watch. And Derrick Rose was a lot better than he was, but similar kind of story. Last time I checked, he was on the Clippers. He's bounced around since leaving Washington, but
I think he's in China somewhere now, or Taiwan.
Yeah. According to this here, John Wall, his last played for the Clippers. But yeah, he hasn't played since 2023.
Yeah. I remember when John Wall went to the Clippers, and then everyone on every show was like, oh my God, if John Wall, I'm not even saying John Wall has to be himself. I'm saying that if John Wall is at least 70% of what he was, maybe even 60, the Clippers have found themselves the point guard that they've been looking for ever since they traded away SGA. And that kind of sums up his career, because I feel like John Wall was always more marketed than he was actually good. Like, he was athletic, he was fun to watch, but he's like Derrick Rose. You compare him to him, but he's like the Walmart Derrick Rose. Like, the guy never made it out of the second round. And then people were always talking about, oh, the Wizards are the best team. They have the best chance to take out Cleveland because you have Bradley Beal, John Wall, Marcin Gortat, who leads the Wizards franchise in win shares over John Wall.
That's a real stat.
That's a real stat. And then also, Bradley Beal and Otto Porter.
Yeah, no, that era, that's the thing, was the Wizards were always an interesting team to watch, but they were never a great team. Like, they were always first round exits. Maybe they won a round, maybe they went to the second round, but they were historically just middle of the pack, 42-40, 44-38 kind of record. Didn't really make much noise in the East. And let's remember how easy the East was for that decade. I mean, the East relatively wide open outside of the Cavs and Heat for a long periods of time, but didn't do anything. So John Wall as a number 1 overall pick, I can't say he's a bust because he did have a good run, but I also can't say that like he's more of a legend than he is like an actual true like star.
Oh, he's definitely a bust. If you're the number 1 pick in the draft and you are maybe the third best player in the draft, you're definitely a bust because there are a couple of players in this draft, more than one, that I would take over John Wall. And, the biggest reason why he's a bust is he lost to Isaiah Thomas without a hip. Isaiah Thomas dropped 54 points in that game. And the real reason, do you remember why the Wizards lost that series to the Celtics?
No.
Kelly Olynyk dropped 16 points in a quarter,
Oh,
gaining the nickname Knockout, KO, from Shaquille O'Neal.
Oh, wow.
The highlight of your career is getting ousted from your team by Kelly Olynyk, who was the one who showed up clutch, and you lost to the Isaiah Thomas-led Celtics when you're the one who was supposed to be the next big thing. But I felt like the reason why the Wizards and John Wall were always hyped up was it was mostly just the media, people at ESPN hyping up the Wizards. Like, if you had to pick one team to take out Cleveland, who would it be? They'd be like, well, the Wizards have the best shot, when we all knew it was nobody, obviously, because the other team would be like DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry or Jimmy Butler on the Bulls, and they just weren't ready at that time.
Yeah. But John Wall, a couple of all-stars, nothing else to make of it. Then we go to the number 2 pick, and we have talked about the anomaly of the top 3 picks, how there's always an all-star, in this case, John Wall, a bust, and that makes it for number 2, Evan Turner, who, what did he do in the league? I'm trying to remember because I can't seem to remember. He averaged 6 points a game, if I'm not mistaken. I'll pull up his stats, but
yeah,
did absolutely nothing in Philadelphia. The laundry list of god-awful Philadelphia 76ers picks.
9 points, yeah.
Averaged 9 points in his career. Played for the Celtics, played for the Trailblazers, played for the Sixers. Was a talking head on CBS Boston for a long time after his career was over.
Yeah.
Didn't do anything. Massive bust at number 2.
Yeah, the best probably era of his career was with the Celtics, and it was mostly because the Celtics were in rebuild, and he was the only one touching the ball. And that was his best time where he was kind of evolving into a point forward, but was never a dominant scorer, was a pretty okay playmaker, but he wasn't spectacular at any real thing. And he helped the Celtics a little bit get through that rebuild phase. But again, it was really because he was the only one touching the ball. Solid player off the bench. But when he went to Portland, he kind of just disappeared into nothing. And now he's a Karen on his podcast.
Yeah. And so that's a massive bust. We had the all-star with John Wall, the bust with Evan Turner, and then the wild card, which brings us to number 3, Derek Favors.
Yeah, averaged more points than Evan Turner, 10 points a game. Evan Turner, as far as win shares, averaged 20. Derek Favors averaged 60.
Yeah, I think Derek Favors, outside of Paul George, who's in this draft, I think he has the second most win shares in the entire draft.
Yeah, and Derek Favors, like, as we go through this draft, you'll kind of see it, but I feel like each draft has a storyline, and the storyline of this entire first round is we'll go through these players, and you'll see a lot of names where you're like, he's not bad, solid NBA rotation player, but also he's one of those names I don't think about, but it kind of just comes to mind because I really liked him on this 1-2K team one time.
Yeah, no, exactly. If you need to fill out a roster, you remember these names well. Derek Favors, one of those guys, filled out your team really, really well. And he was a good NBA player. Number 3 overall good, I don't know, but definitely a solid player.
Yeah, he was probably his best era was on the Jazz with Gordon Hayward, who's also in this draft.
Yeah, no, solid player overall. Number 4, Wesley Johnson, another like solid role player, shooter. Like,
yeah, he averaged 7 points a game. Averaged more. Let's see, how many win shares did he average? Not many, 10 a game.
Yeah, he was more of a role. He kind of was just immediately a role player. Really should have been backing up Steph, but the Timberwolves took Ricky Rubio instead. So yeah, long list of terrible Timberwolves picks that come.
He's one of those players that they're like, LeBron really needs this guy because he'll shoot threes and play defense.
Yeah, no, exactly. So Wesley Johnson, kind of similar to Evan Turner and Derek Favors, just a weird career. Nothing really eventful. I think he was a journeyman too. I think he bounced around a few teams.
Yeah.
But yeah. And then number 5, I mean, this guy for a while was really, really good, but kind of faded out really quickly. Had a lot of injuries. DeMarcus Cousins.
Yeah.
He was for a while really, really good.
Yeah.
Really good for the Kings. And then he went to the Pelicans with Anthony Davis. And really before he went to the Lakers, that was the best team when you had Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins.
Rondo, Drew Holiday.
Yeah, and that team was crazy. They had a really solid team. And then joined Golden State, got banged up, had a couple of different off-the-court issues, and then he was just kind of out of the league, unfortunately. Had a really good peak, but just didn't have a very long peak.
Yeah, would you say his peak is probably the best of anyone in this draft?
Yeah,
Maybe second best?
Second, I think Paul George maybe because, like, was probably higher, but DeMarcus Cousins at his peak was definitely up there. I mean, at this time, you got to remember that Dwight Howard was the best center in the league, and DeMarcus Cousins was challenging him for a while.
Yeah, Tim Duncan was still
Well,
kind of in his prime, too.
Well, Tim Duncan was, I think of him more as the 2000s because he retired in 2016. But you're right. Tim Duncan was still in that mix. But as far as, like, big men who were young and in their prime, DeMarcus Cousins, I think him and, like, Dwight Howard were right in the mix for each other.
Yeah, it was unfortunate because I feel like the Kings definitely wasted his good years, but I felt like DeMarcus Cousins could have been the first pick in this draft. Him and John Wall were both on Kentucky. Washington went with the guard, but I feel like DeMarcus Cousins probably one of the top 3 players in this draft, and I think it's safe to say he was a more dominant player than John Wall was at the peak of his powers.
Well, think about it this way. If DeMarcus Cousins was paired with Bradley Beal, I think that would have complemented them a lot better. Bradley Beal, the big scorer, and then DeMarcus Cousins, just that dominating post presence.
Yeah, I feel like if he got drafted by, honestly, none of these teams above, because I felt like Washington, he'd maybe get to the playoffs a little bit more, but they loved Marcin Gortat and Nene. And then they also, Philadelphia, we've seen how well they've been managing Joel Embiid. Still haven't got around the second round. New Orleans didn't do Anthony Davis right. Minnesota, a dumpster fire. So really, like Sacramento, it's like you shuffle it between these teams. Maybe he goes to the playoffs like another time or 2 with Philadelphia or Washington, but no one that gives you hope.
Yeah, no, like I said, weird draft. I think if I'm going to put him in our top 3 players list of this draft, I'd probably put him number 2 because his peak was really great. Although there are some good role players that come around later on. And then number 6, we have Epke Oda.
Echo Yoda.
Yeah.
He's here. He was drafted. Let's see. What did he do in the league? He had, no, that's Cousins. He averaged 3 points a game, 2 rebounds, and he averaged 10 win shares a game. Congrats. You were drafted from Baylor. You made it to the league. Shout out to you, Yoda. But the next draft pick by Detroit, how could you forget Moose Monroe? I know some people absolutely love this guy. I feel like he doesn't know that he kind of has a cult fan following in the NBA.
Yeah. When I worked at the gym, there was this really attractive Russian girl who favorite player in the league, not LeBron, not Russell Westbrook, not Kevin Durant, Moose Monroe, Greg Monroe, legend, friend of the show. Him and Blake Griffin, those Pistons teams, they sure were a team that played in the NBA. If you remember those fondly, the 41-41 Pistons.
Yeah. I don't know. Was he there with Blake Griffin? Or
Yeah.
was he on the Celtics at that time?
He was at one point. He was.
At one point he was, yeah, because what I remember from him was when it was, I saw Greg Monroe, Andre Drummond, Rodney Stuckey, Taurean Prince, and Brandon Jennings against the Paul Pierce Celtics still.
What a party that must have been.
What a party.
But yeah, Greg Monroe, solid role player. He's a good immaculate grid player.
He was one of those players that Steph made irrelevant when he came into his prime. Because like Greg Monroe, if it was like the 2000s NBA, probably be an impactful player. But for a couple years there, we're starting to see the big man come back a little bit. But he was just unfortunately one of those guys that Steph was like, yeah, you really don't matter in the modern day NBA anymore.
Yeah, and his career was cut short because of it. And then a legend, Tyreke Hill. You want to talk about a 2K legend? Maybe not a legend in the NBA. Tyreke Hill played for a million teams.
Grid legend.
Grid legend as well. You want to talk about whether it be the Sixers or the Clippers or the Trailblazers. The list goes on. I think he played for a total of 8 teams, and I'm pretty sure he's still in the league somewhere. You kind of forget about him, but he's somewhere.
Yeah, he was just one of those names. I was like, oh, Alfred Camino, that's pretty cool. But unfortunately, he only averaged 6 points a game in the NBA. That's just not going to get it done. One of those 3-and-D players who, unfortunately, never really found his groove at any particular team or had like one of those at least one seasons that would get him paid for a couple years.
Yeah, no, unfortunately not. But the number 9 player, Gordon Hayward.
Gordon Hayward was a good player. In Utah, he was an all-star in the West, which I feel like a lot of people forget at a time where the West was hyper competitive. So at one point, Gordon Hayward was a really impactful NBA player. He was solid. He was the best player on that Utah Jazz team and the best player on a playoff team in the West. And his career was on a pretty high trajectory until that unfortunate injury, which is kind of the story with a lot of people in this draft, whether it was, we talked about John Wall previously, we talked about DeMarcus Cousins, Paul George, he's also in this draft. He also had a horrific injury, and kind of the story is we had a couple people in this draft who could have been stars and really broken through to that upper echelon, but unfortunately kind of injuries hindered all 4 of these stars' careers.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because like you mentioned with the Jazz, really great, and then really his first game with the Celtics, first quarter with the Celtics, has a devastating injury, and then he's really just not the same from there. Ends up becoming like the 6th option on the Celtics with the Kyrie era, and it was unfortunate because when the Celtics signed him, he was kind of like the signaling to the fans like they're out of the rebuild era and they're starting to get some teams around them. This is after they had drafted Jaylen Brown, and I believe they had just drafted Jason Tatum. So they were starting to spend some money, get competitive, and then he had that big injury, was never the same. But the Hornets still gave him a bag, and he, bounced around a little bit since then. But him and Paul George are the only active players in this draft.
Yeah, talk about someone who we talked about Stephen A. Smith earlier about being able to command to the market what his value is. A lot of people were mad, said Gordon Hayward was overpaid, but he got another max contract after the Celtics, which I feel like not a lot of other people expected him to really get paid again. The Hornets were like, yeah, sure, we have some money to spend, and there's really not anyone on our team. Our best player is LaMelo Ball, and he's on a rookie contract. So Gordon Hayward, why the hell not?
Yeah, and you know what? He got paid, so all the power to him. And then he's got his career lined up after. He's got a big sponsorship with a lot of the streaming companies because he's a big streamer, plays a lot of games.
Doesn't he play Overwatch?
Yeah, he's a big Overwatch guy. So good for Gordon Hayward. He's got his life after the NBA planned. So kudos to him. Keep making that money. And then number 10, in case you did not know this, Paul George in this draft.
Oh, wow. He was really in this draft?
Yeah, number 10. He's really the only player I can see in this draft that I think will inevitably be in the NBA, the Hall of Fame. Because all these other players, injuries just cut it too short. But you talk about the 2010s, Paul George deserves a conversation there as far as like top 10, top 15 players of the 2010s. So give him a shout out here. Had that infamous run with the Pacers in 2013, making it to back-to-back Eastern Conference Finals against the Heatles, and then went to OKC with Russell Westbrook, and then obviously now he just ended his reign with the Clippers. His next reign will be with the Sixers, but yeah, Paul George, number 10.
Yeah, and it's like one of those Hall of Fame conversations where it's almost on the fringe because it's like some people are like, you need to make the finals to make the Hall of Fame, or it's like how much impact did he really have after those runs on Indiana? And I really have not seen a player have such a career built off of 2 playoff runs where he got to the conference championship back to back. And it was impressive what he did because you look at it, it was George Hill, Lance Stevenson, David West, and Roy Hibbert kind of all at the end of their careers, and none of them really did that much after those Indiana teams. But you did score 13 points in a game 7. You haven't been to a conference championship outside of that 1 year with the Clippers in the West. You didn't achieve what you were supposed to in Oklahoma City. You lost to a rookie in Donovan Mitchell and a player who's useless in the playoffs in Rudy Gobert. And then you didn't do anything with Kawhi Leonard. So he's kind of one of those players who's like, yeah, he's definitely really good, but is he in that tier 1 of stars when you think about him all time? Probably not, but he's definitely the best player in this draft, at least.
Yeah, I would put him in the same conversation as like the 2000s had like a Tracy McGrady figure.
Carmelo.
Yeah, Carmelo is another good example. Like players who they're Hall of Famers, they've had a long, good career, but ultimately just they didn't win anything, and so ultimately like they're going to be below that tier.
Yeah, he's kind of like an NBA version of Phillip Rivers.
Yeah, exactly. Same idea. Put a lot of numbers there, but no playoff success.
But definitely should have been probably the number 1 pick in the draft. And if he was the number 1 pick, Washington Paul George.
I don't know how that would have fared, to be honest.
Him and Bradley Beal.
Well, you know what? Him and Marcin Gortat, I think that could have been a pretty lethal combo. Could they have made the Eastern Conference Finals? Honestly, probably.
I think so. I think they would have done more with Paul George than John Wall. Philadelphia definitely would have been way better with Paul George than Evan Turner. New Orleans, yeah, would he be better than Derek Favors and in a competitive West? But like early Paul George, when he was number 24, when he switched to PG-13, that's kind of when he got commercialized and wasn't as good anymore. But number 24 Paul George was probably the best version of him, and he could have got to a conference championship in the West, I believe, or in the East.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the Wizards team would be an interesting what if scenario had he had gone number 1, but ultimately Paul George, I think he's the lone Hall of Famer in this draft.
And then after him, we kind of get into a lot of role players that you'll know from like either grids if you play or 2K. We have Cole Aldrich, who averaged 3 points a game.
Yep.
Congrats to him. He was drafted. And then back-to-back Kansas players taken. After was Xavier Henry, who averaged 1.9 points a game.
Yeah. Bust.
And then kind of a soft spot player who's one of those players I just randomly know. Ed Davis followed you from Toronto to Portland. Shout out to you, Ed, friend of the show. Patrick Patterson, yeah, him out of Kentucky. He was a pretty good role player, and he was one of those role players where he could get hot from 3 for a little bit. I believe he went from Houston, bounced around a little bit. I think he's probably played for the Raptors and the Clippers as well.
Yeah, he's bounced around a couple of teams. I think he's played for 4 or 5, so another good grid player. And then we have Larry Sanders, role player. I remember him from 2K, but this player, another player who's soft in my heart, Luke Babbitt. Soft spot in my heart for Luke Babbitt. Wasn't an amazing player, but good role player. And we love Luke Babbitt on this show.
Yeah, Luke Babbitt, shout out to you. And then after him, I'm going to skip that player because we have Eric Bledsoe, who is also on Kentucky. I didn't realize he was drafted by OKC.
Yeah, Eric Bledsoe, another guy who's played for a million teams, but probably of the 2010s, I think you can put him in the conversation as like a top 10 role player.
Yeah.
Because when he was on the Rockets with James Harden, really solid role player there.
The Clippers.
The Clippers. Really good. Yeah. He's been on a lot of really good teams. Played on the Bucks. So
with young Giannis. That was when the Celtics played the Bucks. I think that was the year Kyrie got hurt, actually, because I remember it was Terry Rozier was kind of the one who retired Eric Bledsoe.
Yeah. Yeah, so Eric Bledsoe, honestly, in this draft, he's probably a top 5 player, just given how everyone else shaked out. So Eric Bledsoe, very solid in this draft, especially with where he was selected.
Yeah, and then after him, out of Texas, the one and only Avery Bradley.
Yes, and best era definitely with the Celtics. But then he kind of went around. He played for the Lakers for a while, played for the Clippers. I think he was on the Lakers championship team, if I'm not mistaken.
Potentially.
I believe he was on the the bubble team, but let me double check real quick.
Yeah, he may have been on that team. I'm not positive though. But I know Avery Bradley
No, he wasn't.
was one of the most underrated players in the league, at least defensively. His offense was where he had his issue, just never had a consistent shot. But of all the role players, who would I want kind of at their peak? I think Avery Bradley would move up into the at least top 14 picks over someone like Xavier Henry, Ed Davis, or Patrick Peterson.
Yeah, I agree. And then after this, we go into a lot of no-name players. You got the Trevor Bookers of the world.
We got Quincy Pondexter.
That was who I was going to go to next. Yeah, Quincy Pondexter passes the name test as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, he was actually pretty good for a little bit. I believe his best team was the Grizzlies. Did he play for the Grizzlies?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then we got Jordan Crawford as well. Didn't do anything crazy, but another 2K legend.
I remember when they were trying to make Jordan Crawford the next Jamal Crawford. They're like, he plays exactly the same.
And he's got the same last name.
He has the same last name. That's how deep we think in the media. Like, same last name, same crossover. Well, has to be the next big thing. And then he just kind of bounced around a little bit and then went out of the league. I believe there's a player on the Nets players who... Do you remember Marshawn Brooks? Like the same thing. They're like, oh, yeah, in a few years, Marshawn Brooks is going to be so good.
And then he wasn't.
Yeah, where is he now?
And then we go to the second round, right? Because I don't think is anybody noteworthy to add from there. We got, so the next one would be Hassan Whiteside, who was drafted with the 33rd overall pick. Talking about second round, just not a lot of players to shout out. But he had a good career. He played 10 years in the league, played for the Heat, played for the Kings, played for the
Portland,
Trailblazers. Yeah. So really solid career, solid big man, but unfortunately, similar to what you mentioned with Greg Monroe, kind of killed by Steph Curry in that era of basketball.
Yeah, Steph Curry, like, kind of, it was the era where the big man was being basically neutralized by Steph Curry, where it's like, okay, if you have a player on your floor that can't guard on the perimeter, switch on pick and roll, or shoot threes, that player is pretty much going to be made irrelevant for 5-10 years, however long it may be, where we're kind of starting to see a little bit of resurgence from the big man, but now we're seeing the modern hybrids of the big man, where they can shoot threes now.
Yeah.
And it's a requirement, and it should be, honestly, because how crazy would it be if you had to learn all of the game that you play?
Yeah, absolutely. Then the last player that I would want to shout out in this is Lance Stevenson, who, of the players in this draft that we mentioned, right? Obviously, we have the Paul George and the DeMarcus Cousins, John Walls, but Lance Stevenson is probably my favorite player in this draft, and it's because of that infamous moment, blowing in LeBron's ear. He literally had a song written with his name dropped in it only by Nicki Minaj. Everyone knows that song, and it's just become kind of an iconic name. Played for the Lakers, but was really himself with the Pacers. Solid role player. Really love him. One of my all-time favorite role players, believe it or not.
Yeah, Lance Stevenson definitely deserves a plaque in the Hall of Fame just of him blowing in LeBron's ear. And it was an iconic moment, and it was one of those moments where if you were on a basketball team or playing basketball at that time, it's like we all felt that at the same time. And it was kind of like a uniting moment for the country outside of Miami and Cleveland.
Yeah, no, especially if you did not like LeBron leaving Cleveland. This was everywhere back in 2013.
Yeah, it was everywhere in 2013, and it was just one of the most iconic viral sports moments. And Dylan Brooks and Patrick Beverley have tried to kind of recreate the same amount of iconicness, but it's just not the same. You can't recreate something as iconic as Lance Stevenson, and he was kind of the original troll who maybe he wasn't the most talented player, but at least he played pretty good defense.
Yeah, no, he was solid. So we love Lance Stevenson, but that's our 2010 draft. Let us know what you think down below as far as the 2010 draft. How would you rank it if it was a redraft? But let us know. And then we continue on with football, which is the main point of our shows here. Not a lot to go over in the NFL. However, front of the show, Tyreke Hill, best wide receiver in the league to some. He gave out his top 5 quarterbacks in this league. Now we're going to go over our top 5s as we approach the season, as we get closer. But this is Tyreke Hill's top 5, according to the Cheetah.
Yeah, according to the Cheetah, and no surprise, number 1 is Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes, everyone thinks, is the best quarterback in the league. He's currently the only quarterback outside of Matthew Stafford and Aaron Rodgers who are kind of on their way out of the young class who's actually won a Super Bowl.
Yeah, and he's won 3 of them, and he's the best player in the league. The ESPYs called him the best NFL player, and he's on pace to be arguably the best quarterback of all time.
Yeah, and then after that, he has his teammate Tua on the list, and I get it, it's your teammate, so you kind of have to put Tua there, right? Or would you kind of have the conversation with Tua like, hey, I had to give out the top 5 there for my credibility. I'm going to put you number 5 maybe as like I mentioned, like, okay, if you put your teammate number 5, but number 2, when you're talking about a guy who can't beat winning teams outside of the Dallas Cowboys, who also can't beat winning teams, or someone who can't play when it's cold out, someone who hasn't won a playoff game where, I don't know, maybe the qualification should be, maybe you should win a playoff game before you're even in the conversation for top 5, and you can be maybe at the bottom of top 10 if you haven't won a playoff game.
You know, I'm going to give him some slack here because it's his teammate and because Tua feeds him the ball. But if he could throw it to himself, Tua would not be on this list whatsoever. It would not matter. But because it's his teammate, because he gives him all the targets and he does what he's supposed to do in the Tyreke Hill mind, give him as many targets as possible, lead the league in receiving, I'll give him a slide for Tua, even though Tua has no business being in the top 5, because in the AFC alone, he's not even a top 5 quarterback. In fact, he might not even be a top 10 in the AFC at this point. So I'm gonna give him some slack, but Tua should not be on this list.
Yeah, Tua shouldn't be on this list. Definitely not at number 2, but I get it. It's your teammate. But also, if you want to motivate your teammate to really take it to that next level, really warrant being paid, maybe you're like, hey, man, I know in my heart you're top 5 and I know you can get there, but we need you to take it to the next level for us to really be that team next year and use it as some bulletin board material. But maybe Tua is a little bit too sensitive for that.
Yeah, that's what I'm assuming here. And then I think those last 3 of the top 5 are just destinations that he wants to go to when the Miami Dolphins inevitably fail.
Yeah, so when the Miami Dolphins fail, he has Lamar Jackson on here at number 3. And honestly, if you have Lamar at number 3, that's not a pick that I'll say is a terrible one. I think he should be in the top 5, whether you think he should be 3, 4, 5, 2, maybe even 1 for some of you. But I think Lamar Jackson, who has won 2 MVPs, been to 2 conference championships, definitely deserves to be in the top 3 because there's not really any other quarterbacks right now who have the same amount of accomplishments, whether it is hardware or going to the conference championship twice outside of people who are on the way out, like Stafford, like Aaron Rodgers. And then pretty much it's just Mahomes after that for people who have accomplished things.
Yeah, because I think like if you're going to look at a top 5 list, Patrick Mahomes is going to be number 1. I think Lamar has to be in the top 5 because I think compared to all the other players that would be in the top 5, like a Burrow or an Allen or a CJ Stroud, Lamar Jackson does something that that Patrick Mahomes can't, which is run the way he can. So difference maker wise, absolutely. He's got the 2 MVPs. The lack of playoff success hurts him, but I still think that making it to a conference championship is important. And the fact that he's rushed for 1,000 yards in a season and is probably the greatest running quarterback of all time. He's definitely a top 5 quarterback.
Yeah, he's definitely top 5, especially because you look at the other quarterbacks he has 2 MVPs, and Joe Burrow doesn't. Joe Burrow has been to a Super Bowl, but Joe Burrow lost that Super Bowl. Josh Allen, I don't think he's as good as Lamar Jackson because Lamar Jackson really changed the game without a number 1 wide receiver, and he didn't look like ass without Stephon Diggs before he got there, and he's been to the conference championships more times than Josh Allen. Then we're looking at, okay, who else has really accomplished that much? And it's like, well, Dak hasn't been to a conference championship. Jalen Hurts went to a Super Bowl one there, kind of flamed out. Lamar Jackson beat CJ Stroud in a playoff game. So it's like, okay, you could really make the argument that Lamar could be number 2 on this list.
Yeah. And I think going back to the Josh Allen comparison, like Lamar Jackson's a lot more of an efficient player than Josh Allen is. Josh Allen leading the league in turnovers the last 5 years. So, I think Lamar, it's safe to put him at number 2. If you have another player in mind, I think putting him at number 3 is the most fair. I think 3 is giving him enough credit there.
Yeah, 3's definitely giving him enough credit, but the part where you lose me is putting Dak Prescott at number 4, because I could rattle off a lot of players that should be over Dak Prescott in a top 5. Starting with Matthew Stafford, who has won a Super Bowl. Starting with Jared Goff, who has been to a conference championship
and a Super Bowl,
not once, but he's been there twice. Starting with Aaron Rodgers, who has won a Super Bowl. I know he was hurt last year, but last time I checked, Aaron Rodgers is still an NFL quarterback, so that would qualify him for being top 5, correct?
Yeah.
And then after that, Jalen Hurts, who's in the same division, but has actually been to a Super Bowl and capitalized on the wide receiver and offensive talent that he had, even though his running back was not as dominant as anyone as Ezekiel Elliott at the peak of his powers, and A.J. Brown and CeeDee Lamb should be a wash there. And you had Amari Cooper, who's better as a number 2 than Devontae Smith there. So I think Dak has had enough talent to do it. Jordan Love, who beat Dak Prescott in the playoffs last year.
Embarrassed him.
Yeah, and had a real chance to beat the San Francisco 49ers. And get this, how about Brock Purdy, who's actually beat Dak Prescott head-to-head in the playoffs? And it was a pretty close game, and it came down to who's going to make a play, Brock Purdy or Dak Prescott. And Brock Purdy ended up making the play there. So yeah, there's a lot of quarterbacks who have been more successful than Dak Prescott, and Dak Prescott should be near, if you're going to have him in the top 10, should be pretty close to 10.
Yeah, I think the numbers wise, if you want to put the numbers there, and because he's a Cowboys quarterback, he shouldn't be number 4. I would still take him out of the top 5, because even other players you didn't mention, like Joe Burrow, has made it to a Super Bowl, and I think when he's playing, he's a top 5 quarterback. Even though he doesn't have the same experience, CJ Stroud proved last year that he deserves a recommendation here. And then even talent wise, you could put like a Herbert there. I think Herbert's a more talented player than Dak Prescott. And then everybody else you mentioned there. So Dak Prescott, he would be in my top 10, but he wouldn't be number 4. He would probably be like 8 or 9, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
I think him playing for Dallas elevates his career a lot. And the stats that he puts up, because he has all these great players on his team. And a good defense behind him as well. So Dak Prescott, wouldn't put him at number 4. I'd put him much lower.
Yeah, and the stats argument is the one that blows my mind, because we've always had quarterbacks that accumulate a lot of stats. Remember when the Saints were awful and they were always playing catch up? They're still losing games, but Drew Brees was throwing for a ton of yards in those games, and Dak Prescott is getting all of these yards just beating up on inferior opponents. But what I want to see is the Cowboys consistently beat teams with a winning record, actually go out there and beat the 49ers. And I don't think you should be a top 5 quarterback if you can't win a game in the divisional round.
If you can't win a playoff game. I mean, he has one of the worst playoff records in NFL history.
Yeah, he's only won once, right?
He's won 2 playoff games.
2 playoff games.
But he's also been in the league for a decade.
Yeah, but he beat Russ and the Seahawks.
The Giants, too.
And the Giants.
Yeah. No, he beat the Giants, and then he beat the Packers, I believe.
Dak?
Years ago. Yeah, Dak beat...
He beat Russell Wilson one of those times. They beat the Seahawks, and it was like when Chris Carson was the running back there.
Yep.
DK Metcalf was like, oh, there's a game today? I didn't know.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't see him at number 4. But last player at number 5.
Baker Mayfield. Why?
Baker Mayfield. You know, my theory behind this is that, Miami, beautiful weather. The weather's great. If it doesn't work out with the Dolphins, perhaps maybe Chris Godwin's out the door. Perhaps Mike Evans is out the door. Wants to give some attention to Tampa. Doesn't have to move very far. That's my mindset here, because Baker Mayfield is not a top 5 quarterback. Baker Mayfield is probably not even a top 10 quarterback.
Yeah, and Baker Mayfield has been good at times. He did well with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers team who didn't they make the playoffs the year previously, and they lost to the Dallas Cowboys, but they did make the playoffs.
Yeah,
and
they
this
did.
is a roster that has Super Bowl experience, and you could argue that Mike Evans was the best wide receiver that Baker Mayfield had ever played with, because he is Mr. Consistent 1,000 yards. And you could say technically Odell Beckham Jr. is better than Mike Evans, but who would I rather have long-term for my franchise if I'm starting from the ground up? I'll take Mike Evans because he's proven that he has better longevity and he's going to be there consistently, where Odell has played well in spots, but he's never really been able to stay healthy. And then you had a head coach who has been to a Super Bowl, was the defensive coordinator when they were on the Super Bowl, and you still had pretty much the same roster. So he was stepping into a good situation and basically told, don't mess it up.
Yeah.
But did he elevate them to a point where we're saying, what was the Lions' weakness last year?
Their defense.
Their secondary.
Their secondary.
Yeah, because you had a good offensive line. The Lions had a pretty good front seven, but like, if there was any team that you could light up in the secondary, it would be the Detroit Lions. So you get into a shootout with them, and inevitably Jared Goff is able to lead the Lions to a victory in that game. But that's a game, if you're a top 5 quarterback, do you think it would have been a closer game if Joe Burrow was on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers instead of Baker Mayfield? Do you think Joe Burrow would have had a chance to beat the Lions?
100%.
Do you think Lamar Jackson
Yep.
or Josh Allen
Yep.
or Aaron Rodgers or
Yep.
Jordan Love even
Yep.
would have a chance?
Yeah, CJ Stroud.
CJ Stroud. So really, this is more of a thing where I don't think he actually believes Baker Mayfield is a top 5 quarterback. We both think he's probably planning his exit to Tampa Bay when Miami inevitably fails, because why else would you put Baker Mayfield top 5?
Unless if he's just like a homie, but like at the end of the day, Baker Mayfield has no business being on this list.
Yeah.
Same goes with, we had our top 5s here. Last week, if you remember, we went over the biggest bombs in movie history. We went over some of the weird Disney movies that existed, like The Country Bears and Space Invaders. Let me know if you ever checked out any of the movies that we mentioned.
Honey, I Grew the Kids.
Honey, I Blew Up the Kids. Like, how'd that go? But they just released the biggest bombs of 2023. We thought it'd be fun to go over these movies and how big these bombs were. There's a common theme that you'll notice with these movies here. So I have the list in front of me. I'll let you know I'll ask if you've seen any of these movies, because it doesn't seem like many people have. This is from Deadline. Coming in at number 5 with $117 million lost.
What?
$117 million lost. Haunted Mansion, produced by Disney.
Produced by Disney. Yeah, I didn't watch that movie because it was a Halloween movie that came out in July. Usually not a great time to market a Halloween movie. Typically, if it's a horror movie, the ones that have done well are kind of not the ones that rely on a season. Like The Conjuring have been some pretty big summer blockbusters, or the Insidious movies. But Haunted Mansion, didn't really know anything about it. And it was also released in the same month as Oppenheimer, The Meg 2, Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning Part 1, and Barbie. Pretty big movie at that time. Probably going for the same audience as Barbie and The Meg.
Yeah, and this movie cost them $260 million to make, and they only made $143 million back. Big ouch on their wallets there. But
you know who went to see that movie?
Who?
The people who didn't get their tickets to see Barbie or Oppenheimer in time.
Exactly. That's exactly what that was for. But staying with the Disney narrative, the number 4 biggest bomb of 2023, Wish. They lost $131 million. This was $362 million budget, and they made back $231. So $131 million loss.
Yeah, I bet they wish they didn't make that movie and they had that money back, because I wish that someone could waste over $100 million and can I just have like, I don't know, 500,000 of that?
Yeah, just give me $500,000. I don't need all this stuff.
Yeah, I don't even need $1 million. I'll be happy with $500,000.
We'll make the rest of it back. And then number 3, this is a movie that as soon as they announced it, I'm like, why are they making this movie? And then it proceeded to be a massive bomb, one of the biggest bombs in history. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. What ruined this movie? I don't know. The fact that Harrison Ford is basically in a wheelchair at this point. He's ancient. He's in his 80s. Why are we making an Indiana Jones movie when the last one that they made before they purchased the rights to this was a flop? This movie lost $143 million. Indiana Jones, number 3.
Yeah, no one asked for this. We're happy with the first 3. And stop trying to introduce Indiana Jones to a new audience with Harrison Ford. When you think about your plot, when you're writing a movie, Indiana Jones is an action movie. When you have to Weekend at Bernie's the star of your movie for him to star in that movie, maybe you shouldn't make it. And I would honestly be happier if Disney let go of Harrison Ford playing Han Solo, let go of Harrison Ford playing Indiana Jones, and was like, you know what? That was with Lucasfilms when Lucasfilms produced good movies before Disney bought it. Why don't we just make our own Indiana Jones? Why don't we just make our own version of Star Wars separate from the whole Skywalker storyline instead of destroying the name brand of Indiana Jones, instead of destroying the name brand of Star Wars? Because plenty of parents will be like, hey, do you want to watch Indiana Jones The Temple of Doom, which is still a movie that holds up, still a pretty scary movie. It was one of the, I believe, the first PG-13 movies, or that may have been Jaws. And then the Last Crusade and Covenant, like the first 3 movies are all great. And then after the 4th one, people are like, don't do that again. And Disney's like, wait, did you say do that again? Okay. Yeah, let's make another one, because why not? And they paid for it at the box office because everyone said, don't do that again. And what did they do? Turn around and give people a movie that no one asked for and no one wanted.
And that's why they lost $150 million because of it. So hope you learned your lesson, Disney, but we all know you didn't.
Yeah. I can't imagine it's because Harrison Ford's in debt, but what's number 2?
Harrison Ford's doing just fine. The second movie, this is the only movie on this list that isn't Disney, and that is The Flash. Flash losing $155 million. The Deadline article reads, is this because of the Ezra Miller controversy that surrounded it? Or is it the fact that everyone is tired of superhero movies?
Yes. I think both of them.
So both of them. They lost $155 million. Why? One, I think you could have easily recasted Ezra Miller in there if you wanted to go with the culture there. And then also, yeah, it was awful. But then to add insult to injury, what could ultimately become the death of superhero movies, at least for this era, the Marvels.
Yeah.
Which is the number 1 on this list, which is now taken over as the biggest box office bomb of all time. This was the one that was led by Brie Larson, and this was supposed to be like the next generation of the Marvels and just the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This lost $240 million at the office, and we talked about how many other movies were on this list that were Disney and that took massive losses. We're talking about $1 billion in losses between the 4. And I think part of this is because of just garbage that they've been releasing, plus also just fatigue with superhero movies, and then just bad movies in general, ultimately.
Yeah.
How many superhero movies are we going to make? Like, we're going to see number 1 and who that is there, but superhero movies at this point, the biggest, first of all, it started with Iron Man, right? And that was when the whole extended universe became a thing with Disney, when the whole Marvel universe began.
Yeah.
And they started making 2 movies a year, and then 3, and then ultimately it feels like they make a new one every month.
And a show now with Disney Plus.
And a show. And then, for a while it was great. You had a lot of great superhero movies that came from it. The Avengers, you had Infinity War, like pop culture iconic moments, right? You had some good Spider-Mans in there.
Guardians of the Galaxy was cool. It's kind of modern day, like Star Wars for a new audience.
Exactly, right. And then like before then you had like the Christopher Nolan Batman series. You had the X-Men series. You had some great superhero franchises that were in there. And then after Infinity War, it's been just a lot of bad movies.
Yeah, it's been a lot of bad movies, and like there was a point where they started to get saturated like in the 80s and 90s, and like Batman and Robin was really the kind of nail in the coffin for superhero movies until X2 came out, and then people were like, okay, you can kind of make a serious movie. But the problem is the worst superhero movie from that time, which is Batman and Robin, which kind of ended that whole area, is still way more entertaining than these hollow, oh my god, we gotta save the bad guy, will they win? Oh, we all won, congrats, we won. And then we won one time, but we can go back in time literally to change the ending. So it's like, okay, if we can go back in time to change the ending, then nothing matters anymore. So you basically told your fans none of the main heroes are gonna die. We'll kill one of them because Robert Downey Jr., spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Endgame, he dies. You had 5 years to see the biggest movie released in human history outside of Infinity War and the Avatar movies, but you kill the guy who clearly was tired of doing it. I've been filming these movies since probably 2007 because Iron Man came out in 2008, and he's like, please let me out of my contract. And then, okay, we'll kill the guy who doesn't want to be anymore. Same thing with Chris Evans. And then after Avengers 2 is when they's like, okay, instead of 2 movies a year, which is manageable, we're going to do 3 movies a year. Then it turns into 4 in a show. And then 2013, DC released Man of Steel. But we fast forward to 2016, DC wants to catch up to Marvel. And the thing that really killed superhero movies is Marvel completes their thing with Endgame, and none of the movies after that, everyone's like, okay, exhausting. We checked out. That's a lot of movies to go through. But DC kind of ruined it because they tried so fast to catch up to Marvel that Batman versus Superman was kind of disappointing for a lot of people. Had Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor, which was bizarre. He's talking about Granny's peach tea, but you had The Flash, and then you rushed Justice League, and Justice League, the original cut, you had Joss Whedon fix it, which was not good. And then you just have, okay, we still need to release Aquaman 2. We still need to release The Flash, which we've already paid all this money to. And then people are like, okay, how many more X-Men movies on top of that? So we're looking at 6 to 8 superhero movies a year plus shows. It got way oversaturated, and maybe 2 to 3 of those would be passable, and that's being generous.
And then also I felt like not only did they keep releasing these movies, but then also you saw like going deep into the comics, so you saw like Black Beetle, and you saw Shazam, and then like I know Deadpool is a bigger character, but Deadpool got into the mix. We saw
Ant-Man.
Ant-Man was in there, and then I don't even remember what The Rock's superhero was. That Black?
Oh, that was no, Black Adam. Yeah,
Black Adam. I'm like, you're starting to see all these different superhero movies. It's like, how much more are we gonna get of this? And now at this point, it's cartoonish at this point.
Yeah.
What we're seeing here. I think there's a new movie coming out that has something to do with a bee, if I'm not mistaken.
A bee.
Yeah, we have Aaron something Johnson.
Oh yeah, we have what is it? Craven. I think it's Craven the Hunter. Yeah, Aaron Taylor Johnson's gonna play Craven the Hunter, which got pushed off, and then Sony tried to do their own like cinematic universe with monsters, and then they tried to do Venom, and the Venom movies weren't really that well received. Fox, before Disney merged with them, they would do like once every decade we would get an awful Fantastic Four movie, and that one really bombed.
Massive
and then
bomb.
Sony tried to do the whole thing. They did Venom, and they're like, okay, that was passable enough. And then once you start doing Morpheus and Madame Web, which was so bad because you would basically, if you've seen Madame Web, she sees the future is her power. But the problem is if she sees her future, you're seeing the next part of the movie. So you basically have 2 really bad movies merged into one. Movies in general too, like I feel like with the Marvels, not a lot of people liked Captain Marvel, and then Marvel was trying to push Brie Larson as the next Tony Stark of the Avengers, and people really didn't want to see that happen. And the funny thing is, we talked about John Carver, how Disney was placing all of their eggs in that basket. They want this to be the next big thing, loses a ton of money. With the same thing with the Marvels, where they want to push Brie Larson as the head of the Avengers, and then that kind of falls apart, while simultaneously the big bad villain for the next part of the MCU, for whatever Secret Wars, including the X-Men they're going to do for Avengers 5 and 6. Well, the villain was going to be played by Jonathan Majors. And he had a whole case where I believe it was a domestic, I don't know if it was a rape case. I don't want to miscategorize him, but he had some sort of domestic violence case that he was going through. So they basically had to scrap that entire plan and restart over. They basically are like, yeah, we really don't know what we're doing at this point, but we just have to keep recreating AI generated scripts. And you can make a cliche movie, but at least do it well, at least do it fun. These are just kind of like dry, soulless, predictable movies where we've seen it all before. And sometimes you just need a 5-year break, and then people will be more accepting to superhero movies coming back, which I feel like that's what DC is doing right now, where they're kind of just taking a hiatus. They're doing a soft reboot. They brought in James Gunn to kind of reshape their whole universe. So we'll see if that's successful, or if we kind of have permanent superhero fatigue. We'll really take something transcendent to bring it back, because I think we've seen kind of the end after Avengers Endgame, and ever since 2019, then COVID hit, the theaters were shut down, and movie theaters really haven't been the same. Because I remember going there would be like, and I worked at a movie theater for 3 years, where we'd have at least 4 to sometimes 10 people on staff on the weekends, and winter vacation was a real thing with the theaters being busy. Now it's like 2 people there if you go to a movie theater helping out now.
Sometimes you might even just see just one, ultimately, depending on the day. So it's unfortunate where movies are at this point. I think that a lot of the reason why people aren't going to the theaters is because of these big blockbusters and the same old at the theaters. But I think what gives me hope is you see movies like, if you look at the opposite of this list, the movies that were massively successful, you saw the Super Mario Brothers, you saw Barbie, you saw Oppenheimer, you saw a couple of big kids movies that have been successful. So I think ultimately what's going to bring people back to the movie theaters are going to be just fun, creative movies that are lighthearted, that people can enjoy.
Yeah, and you have to market it like a summer blockbuster movie, and then really give people a reason to get into the theater, because I feel like people still do go to the movie theater at some point if it's something they really care about. Like Barbenheimer was a real thing, and we've seen some spurts of people going to the movie theater, but the trend we've seen recently this year is 3 out of the top 5 grossing movies so far have been kids movies, where we have Kung Fu Panda 4, Minions 4, and what was the
Inside Out 2.
Inside Out 2, where it's like, I feel like adults, we're seeing a trend where they're happier just waiting for streaming. They don't really want to spend $60 to go to a movie because it can be expensive, where people are like, well, I need the kids to just shut up for 2 hours and bring them somewhere where they're not going to be a demon or all up in my space for a little bit. So let's go to the movie theater. We can do something together and be quiet for a little bit. And then it's something where they can get out of the house. But adults are kind of at this point like, all right, well, maybe I'll just wait for streaming instead of going out to pay $60 to see a movie.
Yeah, I also think that some of the success of these movies as well, like the Kung Fu Pandas and the Mario movie and some of the other movies we mentioned, is because even though they're targeted for kids, they're still movies that people our age could watch and enjoy.
Yeah.
Like if we were to go back 20 years ago, like the SpongeBob movie or Kung Fu Panda or the Minions movies, like movies that we can have fun watching without feeling completely ridiculous. So I think that's going to be a big appeal moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. Just make a movie that everyone like wants to see, get people excited about it. And I feel like when you keep continuing these franchises, it just makes people fatigued, not really want to go to the movie theater. And then you'll also see when people get back to the movie theater, they completely forget how to interact with society. Like when we went to see Jurassic Park Dominion, which was, I
Yeah.
feel like that was one of the first big movies that got people back to the theater. And then you give them this massive disappointment where, you know what we should do instead of focusing on dinosaurs? Locusts. I mean, something like Jurassic Park should not be that hard to make entertaining. It's dinosaurs and they eat people. That's all you need to give me.
That's all it is. And they failed miserably. And that movie was god awful, even though we had a great time.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, biggest bombs of 2023, Disney, they're going to have some tax write-offs for sure with those movies. But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything that we were going to talk about. We're going to be on a small hiatus just for these next 2 weeks as this man is making the jump over to the Alamo, Austin, Texas.
Yeah, I'm going to Austin, Texas. We're an hour and a half away from the Alamo, which resides in San Antonio. But yeah, driving down to Texas, hoping there's not too much unrest with a quiet weekend we had recently here. But yeah, going to Buffalo. So if you want to talk about the Buffalo Bills, I will be there if you can find me. And then going to Kentucky, we'll be in Nashville for a couple days and then making my way down to Austin. So hopefully it's a fun drive. If you have any good spots to check out in any of those cities, definitely let me know. But looking forward to go to Kid Rock's Honky Tonk in Nashville.
That's going to be sick. I don't know if you should be in Buffalo, though. If you have some enemies in Buffalo who are not going to be a big fan of you.
Yeah, I'll have my security detail with me.
Yeah, well, hopefully, let's hope that the shooter is as good as Trump's shooter, and then we'll be in good place.
Yeah, definitely. And then we'll be off, and then this will be the last time we'll be in this setup. And then from here on out, we will be doing live streams. So then you'll be able to interact on the live, probably do those like 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern time, because you're also going to Phoenix, Arizona in the next couple days. So the kind of flow of the show from here will be a live stream format, and then we'll try and give you at least 3 shows a week, and definitely looking forward to that change as well.
Yeah, I'm excited to get away from the East Coast. You and I both have lived here our entire lives, and now we make the jump somewhere where in the wintertime we can go outside and be warm and have a good time and like be basically what the summer is in the East Coast, but all year round. I'm excited for the move, and I think the next couple of months, once when we're settled in, like it's gonna be, I think this is gonna be the best season that we've had moving, like when we go into the NFL season. So it's gonna be great. I'm excited for the change.
Yeah, it's gonna be great, and definitely leaving the East Coast, having warm weather year round will help. And it's like tough when it's cold during the winter, but you don't do any winter sports like skiing or snowboarding, and then everyone here is just either a complainer or it's super standoffish, and it's just expensive on the East Coast, and you don't get as much for your dollar, where our place doesn't have central air, and in the winter we have to heat everything with space heaters because they're like one gas heater in the room that you don't use. Yeah, we got you.
Yeah, and it's exciting for the move, but big things to come for the Brickyard. We have a lot of things up the pipeline, so make sure to stay up to date with our latest content. We'll be off for at least the next 2 weeks as things start to transition, but next time you see us, we're going to be live on TikTok, YouTube, and all the other platforms, so you won't want to miss it here.
Yeah, and even with the change up, the most important thing will be
Stay brick.